Hey again, guys. So this was part 3 of my Halloween Universal Monster special, the Mummy series. And I know I said the creature was my favorite, Frankenstein was good, but the Mummy is also just as good. So I highly suggest watching each of these movies individually. I'm going to get to Dracula and the Wolfman and the Invisible Man at some point. Don't worry, they're on the way. We'll have 3 more Halloweens together. The Mummy. We've seen the Mummy used before time and time again.
Coin? Okay, like here's a quarter.
I'll bet he means that old Egyptian coin.
1920s was all about ancient Egypt, so why not make a movie about a monster that came from that era in 1932? The original Mummy was directed by Karl Freud. The Mummy was also released on December 22nd, 1932, less than a year after Dracula and Frankenstein. The eerie music for the movie was composed by James Dietrich. It's also definitely worth mentioning that Jack Pierce, who worked on Frankenstein, did the makeup effects for this movie as well. I really do love these old school intros. The miniature spins around right into our title. Nice touch. We get a translation of hieroglyphics that kind of lay down the tone for the movie. This is from the Scroll of Thoth, which is going to become pretty important throughout the movie. Death is but a doorway. Huh.
Just before his head died, his last words were, "Death is but a door, time is but a window, I'll be back."
I wonder if that's a nod to this movie.
Right, suck in the guts, guys. We're the Ghostbusters.
Our movie gets going with a field expedition in 1921 by the British Museum. This is Sir Joseph, played by Arthur Byron, and his assistant, of some sort, Ralph, played by Bramwell Fletcher. They're discussing what they just discovered. In the background there, we see with the newly discovered mummy is none other than Edwin Van Sloan as Dr. Moeller. He points out that this is no ordinary mummy. This poor fella, who we find out his name is Imhotep, and he was buried alive, but we're not sure why just yet. And in case you didn't know, the mummy is played by Boris Karloff. While they try to discuss and figure out why this guy was hastily and horribly buried this way, they also discover a box that's buried with him. And not for nothing, but if this guy was clearly being punished for something he did, I wouldn't open up his luggage. Turns out if you open this box, you will be cursed. Mueller tells Ralph not to open it, but do you think he listens? No! Mueller tells Sir Joseph just to put the box back and avoid opening it. There's gonna be trouble. And of course there is trouble because Ralph reads the text out loud that comes with the scroll inside of it. And he wakes up Imhotep. I know it's been pointed out before here on a lot of reviews for this movie, but yeah, that guy's laugh is pretty insane. Fast forward 10 years, and we have another expedition from the same museum in the same area. This is Frank Wimple, played by Dave Manners, and Professor Pearson, played by Leonard Moody. Frank is the son of Sir Joseph.
Story that young Oxford chap he had with him going mad. You know what I think it was?
No. What?
I think he went crazy. Bored beyond human endurance, messing around in this sand and these rocks.
He was laughing when your father found it. He died laughing.
Oh, Ralph died. I guess we got one dead already.
Come in.
And this is Imhotep, but he goes by Ardith Bey now. Imhotep, or Ardith Bey I'll call him for right now, gives a 2-minute piece of burial equipment that he found out in the desert. He said it was part of the Araxunamun tomb, which is actually going to turn out to be his old girlfriend, and that's why he's trying to get these guys to dig her up, because Egyptians can't dig up their dead, so he's going to get them to do it for them. And that burial tomb is not far from where they're at right now. He shows them where, and they get to work. They find the tomb, and it hasn't been opened in almost 3,700 years.
The name of Ankhsenamun. We will cable your father in London.
They bring her sarcophagus to Cairo and place it in the museum there, where Sir Joseph and Mueller are, and so is Ardith. This is Helen Grossen, played by Zeta Joanne. She's going to be our monster's love interest, and she's out partying with Mueller. Back at the museum, Ardith gets full access to the exhibit thanks to Sir Joseph. After all, he did kind of tell them where she was buried. Ardith goes to work and tries to bring his lady back, but somehow Helen hears this spell, and it drives her to head back to the museum under that spell. Luckily for her, Frank was just leaving the museum and intercepts her. They bring her back to Sir Joseph's, and she's speaking ancient Egyptian, which totally blows their minds. And Arthur gets busted and he kills the guard. Off-screen death, it still counts. Mueller makes a house call to check in on Helen, and Frank puts the moves on Helen's, by the way, when no one is looking. The full court press.
You know, I'd have liked Egypt better if I'd met you there. No such luck.
Sir Joseph and Mueller head to the museum when they hear about the guard being killed. They find the scroll that Imhotep was using to try to bring his girlfriend back. And then they have to go pull Frank off Helen, and they start to connect the dots. Remember, they thought that Imhotep, the mummy, and the scroll were both stolen and disappeared 10 years ago. Now they think he might be up walking around, and he's planning to put a curse on Helen and use her to bring back his old lady. And another suspicion is that maybe Ardith isn't who he says he is. While they're pondering all this, he makes a house call to visit Sir Joseph, but he meets Helen instead and thinks, hey, you're pretty good looking, and for some reason I think I know you. The others interrupt, so Frank takes Helen back to the hotel, and Mueller now questions Ardith about, hey, how did you get this scroll, and how did you know exactly where the princess was buried? It doesn't take them long to figure out that he is actually Imhotep the mummy, and he gives them the old, you guys can't stop me, I'm the bad guy speech. He casts out one more curse and kills Sir Joseph. One of Imhotep's servants sneaks in and burns a bunch of papers to make it look like Sir Joseph was actually trying to burn the scroll, which makes them think that Imhotep must have killed him for burning the scroll. But in reality, now Imhotep has that scroll that he needs. But Frank and Mueller are a lot smarter than Imhotep takes them for, and they figure out pretty quick that the scroll was not burned because that was papaya leaves the scroll was made out of, and there was just newspaper ashes in the fire. So they rush over to check on Helen to make sure Imhotep doesn't have her already. But she unfortunately is already under his power. Imhotep gives a backstory on how and why they got to this place in time. Helen looks a lot like his dead lover on Uxtuna-Moon, so she may be a relative of hers, which is what we kind of figured already, considering before that, curse kind of got a hold of her. So when the original princess died, Imhotep wanted to bring her back using this scroll, but unfortunately that pissed the gods off. And he got busted trying to do the ritual to bring her back. And then his father, the pharaoh, said, nah man, that's a big no-no, I'm sorry. So now you're condemned to death. Great parenting. The only thing is, they bury him alive, and they defile his tomb. This way, if anyone discovers him, they'll be like, yeah, this guy did something naughty, so, let's just leave him where he is. And that's the reason why that scroll was buried with him, so it can never be used again. And just to make sure they never find him, they even killed a burial team.
The soldiers who killed them were also slain. So no friend could creep to the desert with funeral offerings for my condemned spirit.
Yeah, I'd have the same look too if someone just told me that story. But also because she's a little freaked out that Imhotep knows that her and Frank got something going on. And unfortunately, for Imhotep's ritual to work, she can't have feelings for another man, and no man could have feelings for her. Over the next few days, unfortunately, she grows sick and weaker, and she's becoming closer to death. But we got Mueller back on the scene, and he says, you gotta let her go, which Frank thinks he's out of his mind, but Mueller makes a good point. When she goes to Imhotep, they'll follow, and they'll be able to destroy him as well. From a distance, Imhotep is able to force choke Frank so Helen can escape. Random guy death. So Imhotep is ready to commence his ritual, which is making her into a mummy, like a living mummy like him. Frank and Mueller interrupt in the nick of time. The other thing is, she also prays to one of the maidens of Isis, which I guess wasn't really down with this in the first place, so that also helps set Imhotep back to the underworld. really, it's her love for Frank that saves her. I guess. The end. So my only question is, what did Imhotep do for the 10 years from when he was a mummy and he woke up to meeting up with Frank and Pearson? Other than that, this definitely is a considerably great movie. One of the best early classic monster movies for Universal. Boris Karloff is spooky and creepy, and he is awesome as a lead villain. And you also feel bad for him at times because really all he wants to do is love this woman, but just not for him, man. It's not in the cards. Ed Van Slow is also awesome in this again as the doctor with all the answers. He's battled Frankenstein, the Mummy, and we're going to see later down the road Dracula as well. The remake is also worth mentioning to check out. I haven't seen the 2017 movie, but let's just walk away from that now. Next up, we have The Mummy's Hand. The Mummy's Hand is the next installment in the Universal Mummy Monster movie series. It was directed by Christy Cabana. This was released on September 20th in 1940, 8 years after the first movie, which isn't really a sequel to the Boris Karloff one, it just uses some scenes for it for the flashback. This time though, we get the full-on mummy and bandage look. The music is already pretty intense. This is Professor Anobi, and he is played by George Zucco, and he's taking a long trip from Cairo to see Olmec from Legends of the Hidden Temple. No, he's really going to see the High Priest played by Eduardo Chantilly, and he's ready to pass on his secrets before he dies, which is pretty much to sum up the story of Imhotep from the first movie, but this time the mummy's name is Karis, played by Tom Teller, and the Princess Ananka. See, this is where I meant earlier when I said they use a flashback from the first movie, but all they really did was, instead of showing Boris Karloff, they added Tom Teller's character. And it's the same idea as the first one. He wants to bring back his dead girlfriend. Only this time, they use katana leaves. The old priest tells him that on the night of the full moon, if you cook up 9 of these leaves, Karis will be alive. You just gotta get it into his system somehow. But never do more than 9, because then you will not be able to control him.
Children of the night.
They do a good job at tying all these movies together. This is the original movie universe here. So they make Anubi the new high priest. And then the old man dies. Sure, let's count it. Even though he wasn't killed by the mummy, but... Here's our leading guys. The taller fella is Steve Banning, played by Dick Florian. And the other guy is Babe, played by Wallace Ford. He's gonna be our comic relief.
I can smell those old Coney Island hot dogs.
And Poopsie.
Sure. Huh?
These guys really remind me of a bad version of Abbott and Costello. They are treasure hunters seeking fame and fortune. Steve buys this vase that apparently will tell him where the Princess Ananka is buried. Real quick, the man that sold him the vase is Michael Mark. He was also in The Wasp Woman, Frankenstein, The Son of Frankenstein, and The House of Frankenstein. We've seen him a couple of times. This is Dr. Petrie, played by Charles Throwbridge. That is an awesome name. And guess who also is interested in that vase?
Oh, come in, gentlemen.
Man, I love using that. He tells them that he thinks the vase is BS.
The tomb of Ananka were really found on the Hill of the Seven Jackals.
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, Karis is buried in the Hills of the Seven Jackals. They say it a lot in this movie. Almost as much as
big as a battleship.
A flying battleship?
Big as a battleship.
it is a really good blues band name, though. Now remember, Andobi is trying to drive people away from looking for the princess's tomb. But Steve and Babe say, nah, we're gonna go try to find her anyways. Because Petrie gets them the permit to dig. Now they just need funding. And they get it from Tim Sullivan, who was played by Cecil Kellaway. Remember him from The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms?
Oh, if all the items of seamen reporting monsters were placed end on end, they'd reach to the moon, my boy.
He's also a magician on the side, so he is actually more of the comic relief than Babe is. I kind of wonder if this movie leaned a little more towards comedy because the state of the world when this was made? I don't know. I can't really say. Overhearing the planning of the dig is one of Anobi's henchmen. He goes then and tips him off, and then he decides to go and persuade Sullivan's daughter, Marta, for him and her father just to get out of Egypt. Marta is played by Peggy Moran. But unfortunately, the papers are signed and we have an expedition. But not before an awesome bar fight with all of Hanobi's thugs. They take Marta with them on the dig. Why not? The monster's gonna need something to go after later. They do find some remains of a different expedition. I'm not gonna count that as a death toll because... we're just gonna skip that one. Upon opening the tomb, which Babe does by mistake with dynamite, they find Karis and a collection of Tana leaves, but no princess. So needless to say, they're a little let down. Which reminds me, the henchman that you keep seeing, the lead one, is known as the Beggar, and he's played by Sig Arno. The lead guy on the dig site, Allie, played by Belasco, tells them the rest of the diggers have left and are totally freaked out and will not come back because they think the area is cursed. That night, Adobe shows up and shows Petrie what those Tana leaves are all about.
What?
It's beating faster. He's alive. Let me go! You son of... Let me go! Let me go! Let me go!
Now, we found out that this square indicates the mummy's cave. But her name is way over here. Could that mean anything?
Well, it might mean that a tomb were somewhere behind the cave.
Exactly. There must be some sort of a connection between the two.
While the others dig for the passageway to Ananka's tomb, which they think now exists, those leaves can also be used to bait Karis. The Beggar puts some in the explorers' tents. Unfortunately, poor Allie finds that vial of leaves. They find Allie dead the same way as Petrie, actually. So, it's time to get American. Babe and Steve send Marta and her father to bed, and they decide to take a patrol and watch the camp until the morning when they decide to leave.
Do you mind if I say I think you're a swell person?
That is the scariest scene in the movie to me. That split second, the music, the mummy, crazy. They try again with the leaves, but unfortunately this time they left it in Steve and Babe's tent, and that's where Babe and Steve sent Marta and her father to sleep. But the mummy decides not to choke out Sullivan and takes Marta instead. So now they need to get her back. But first, they gotta take care of this guy snooping around.
The beggar from the Cairo Bazaar.
Karis brings Marta back to where Ananka's tomb must be. While Steve tries to figure out a way into the tomb, Babe goes all the way around to try to find the front of the temple. And what do you know? There is a sacrificial chamber in there, and guess where they put Marta? Our heroes find the passageway and the entrance to the tomb to save Marta. Babe actually caps the bad guy.
If you were to kill me, you would leave at large a monster whom only I can control. 3!
Jeez.
Fatality.
Steve does battle with the mummy to keep him away from the Tana fluids. The mummy gets burned up and everyone has a giggle and goes back to America. This movie is interesting because most of the other Universal monster movies, the second one kind of follows the first one. This one takes a whole new path, which I find kind of refreshing. And Adobe's eyes are very intense. He's a great bad guy. He's not too crazy, keeps his cool, but hey, you know he's up to some serious shit. And they look better than the mummy's eyes when he kills people. The monster effects look good in this one, which is pretty good too. Up next, we have The Mummy's Tomb. The Mummy's Tomb, directed by Harold Young, is a sequel to The Mummy's Hand. This was released on October 23rd, 1942. Let's get into this one. I think the entrance to the passageway from the last movie is behind us in the opening credits and our title screen. We open with Steve from the last movie, again played by Dick Foran, talking with his son John, played by John Hubbard, and his girlfriend, played by Elsa Knox, and his sister Jane, played by Mary Goodman. They're just hanging out, having some good old family time, while Steve recaps the last movie for us. If you want to know a more in-depth review of that movie, you could check out our last review. So this takes place 30 years after the last movie, so R.I.P. Marta. So this is technically 1970.
At least I have the satisfaction of having destroyed a terrible monster, and in doing so, rid the world of an awful curse.
Well, you thought you were safe, Steve. Turns out Babe isn't that great of a shot after all, because George Zuko is back as an Obi, just a lot older. And this time he has a new disciple, Mahatma Bey, played by Turban Bey. Oh, and Karras is back too. This time he's played by Lon Chaney Jr. And how the hell he lived at the end of the last movie, I have no idea either. He's given one mission. Kill Steve and his whole family. And anyone else involved in the last movie too. And again, like last time, the old priest dies. Mehmet brings Karras back to the United States. He sets up a job in a cemetery as a caretaker near the house where Banning lives. Convenient. And they waste no time getting to work either. This is actually a pretty cool what the fuck moment for the entire town. They just see the shadow pass by them, and it scares the crap out of all of them.
Hello, Sheriff speaking. What do you want? A shadow? You wake me up for that?
Karras goes after Steve, and he gets him right before bedtime. They think he was murdered, but by who? The next day, the sheriff, played by Cliff Clark, gets a visit from the townsfolk who all thought they saw this shadow walk past them last night. One of the things that Mahatma was told to avoid was temptation. But once he gets one look at Isabel, he's like, maybe I can break that oath a little bit. It's a new night, and it's time for some new missions for Karras. This time he gets on Jane. This time the only witness is kind of trapped in a state of paralysis after seeing the mummy. This is Jim, the house hand, played by Paul Burns. Wallace Ford is back as Babe again. Babe knows there's a mummy on the loose, but no one wants to believe him. But unfortunately for Babe, someone overhears him talking about what he thinks is going on. Poor Babe. John and Isabel find a piece of the mummy's wrappings, and they bring it to a guy named Professor Norman, played by Frank Riker. He tells them he's 100% sure that this piece of cloth came from Egypt, and it's definitely part of a mummy, whether they want to believe him or not. In the meantime, Mehmet says, "You know what? I'm giving in. Can you kidnap Isabel for me?" Karras actually shows that he's not down with this plan, but he follows orders anyway. The sheriff says, "Hey, let's skip just right to the angry mob and go find this monster." Isabel gets brought to the cemetery where they've been hiding out. He tells her, "You should be honored that I want you as a wife, baby." She takes it pretty well. Before they can do all that, the mob shows up. Hitman meets them head on, and he tries to shoot John, but that doesn't go so well for him because the sheriff caps him first. The mummy picks up Isabel and takes her back to John's dad's house? I don't know, maybe he thought the last guy went too nutty, so he's going to return her. Dave tries to save her and he gets knocked out. Too bad for him because the mob is already starting to burn down his dad's house. John gets up and he's able to rescue Isabel, just before the house goes down in flames. So this is the second time Karras has been lit on fire, so maybe this time with the house being brought down on top of him, this will finally be the end of him. John and Isabel get married in the meantime, and it makes front page all over. Guess not too much else was going on around town. And then good times were had by all. The end. I want to add that after the credits they have the "Here we sell U.S. war bonds" ad. I think that's a nice touch they left this in the DVD. My only complaint with this movie is it's too short. It's only just about an hour. I do hate seeing characters from the last movie get killed, but it kind of segues into the new guy, so that's alright. Maybe a little more character development would have been nice. We do get that random kind of draft card thing for John, but it really goes nowhere. Also, oddly, I think they should have flipped the name of the movies, because in the last one, we saw Ananka's tomb, but in this one, it's called The Tomb, and we don't see one, but he uses his hands more to kill. Lon Chaney is without a doubt an awesome character in this movie. Overall, not a terrible movie, just short. And up next, we have The Mummy's Ghost. The Mummy's Ghost was directed by Original LeBourne and was released on June 30th, 1944. Let's jump right into this one. We open up with a meeting with another high priest. Wait a minute, that's an Obi. So I guess he didn't die in the last movie because that's George Zuko again, so now I gotta go back and fix that last one. Oh, well, it's probably gonna get taken down anyway. I also just remembered that he was Professor Lampini in The House of Frankenstein. This is Joseph Blay, played by John Carradine. We all remember him, right? He's being sent to the United States because Karras is still alive. So I was wrong again. Bringing a house down on top of a mummy won't kill him off either. Oh, this is different though. Instead of a flashback, we have Professor Norman from the last film, still played by Frank Reacher, telling his class the history of the last two movies. Okay, that's pretty cool. These knuckleheads are, well, the first guy they never really say his name, but I think that's Steve Barclay? If I'm wrong, feel free to let me know in the comments. And the second guy is Tom Hervey, played by Robert Lowry. And this is his lady, Amina. She's played by Ramsey Ames, who gets all shook up every time someone mentions ancient Egypt. She doesn't like to talk about it. I wonder why. Back in Egypt, Adobe tells Yusuf that Ananka is alive too, believe it or not, and he wants them both brought back to Egypt for their final resting place. Now, jump back over to the US. Mrs. Norman, played by Claire Whitney, tells Dr. Norman to call it a night. But Dr. Norman figures out how to bring Karras back. It's with the katana leaves. But that's not a good idea to use them, man. Lon Chaney Jr. is back as Karras again. He takes a stroll past Mina, and she seems to be drawn to whatever just walks past her. Black cat, nice touch. So Karras kills Dr. Norman to get his leave. Amina shows up to Norman's house, and she kind of sees the mummy, but she faints. Nice tattoo. Next morning, the coroner, played by Emmett Logan, has no doubt that a mummy killed Norman. The sheriff, played by Harry Shannon, wants to know why Mina was also found at the site. They found her passed out in the garden in Norman's house. Tom shows up to check in on Amina, and the sheriff thinks he's a punk ass, though. Ah, the tattoo, and now her hair is changing colors. What is going on here? That's a pretty big area to cover. To avoid more trouble, the sheriff does this martial law kind of thing and has all the town's men take shifts watching for the mummy while everyone else has to stay indoors. But Yosef doesn't play by any American police rules, so he gets to work finding Karras. Tom and Amina are out with their dog, Peanuts. I love that name. Out on Lover's Lane when Karras happens to walk past them. He also visits this farm. Nice way using the door, buddy. Yosef completes one part of his mission. Now he has to get the princess back. Him and the mummy sneak into the museum where the princess is. I do find it kind of funny here that Karras will use the door as he walks in and he'll shut it behind him, but he'll walk his own way out of the barn. When they try to resurrect her, they find out that her body has been taken into another form. I wonder who that is. Karras is not happy about this, so he decides to destroy everything in his path, including the guard. Two more new characters. This is museum curator Dr. Ayo, played by Leslie Sharp, and Detective Walgreen, played by Barry McLean. They are stumped over all these break-in/murders, so they're gonna head up to Mapleton. Walgreen explains to the other guys in town his idea on how to catch the mummy. He's gonna light up some of those katana leaves to bring the mummy to them, but first they're gonna dig a big hole, cover it, and hope the mummy falls in. I wonder if that's gonna work. So, trying once again too hard, Mark gets shut down, and he lets everyone know that he's taking her back to New York tomorrow to get away from all this BS. Mrs. Norman spills the beans about the amount of leaves that are needed to bring back Karis. At least she was paying attention to the hieroglyphics. So they light the leaves up. Amina and Peanuts see the mummy heading to the doctor's house. So they meet face to face, and he takes her breath away. Tom gets word of this and rushes after her. Smaller mob for this movie. The mummy takes her back to his and Yosef's hideout. Come on, man.
The birthmark of an Anka.
Ah, so her tattoo is a birthmark saying she's the princess. Okay, that makes sense now. Yosef has this strange monologue type thing here where I'm not really sure who he's talking to. I think it's his conscience, but he starts to question his mission. And now look at her hair, it's fully white now. I think ever since she saw Karis and got close to him, she's starting to age rapidly. So now Yosef decides that he wants Amina for himself. But Karis isn't down with that, so he says, "See you later," with a nasty bitch smack. Okay, let's see what Tom's got here. Nothing. Same with John in the last movie. Karis makes a run for the swamp, and Amina has really aged quite a bit too. Not sure why he went this way because the bog swallows them both up. And Tom cries. Sad ending this round. At least Peanut made it. This is going to be a strange observation about this movie, but it looks like it came out later than it really did. This looks like it came out more in the 50s in the way the dialogue is delivered. I really did not like the hero in this one, Tom. He reminds me of Ben Affleck from that episode of South Park. He plays an over-loving boyfriend, and honestly, she doesn't seem that interested in him. Peanut, though, that's the hero of the movie. Kinda wish we got a scene where we actually saw Karis come out from the rubble of the last movie, but that's okay. I understand, World War II was on, and I'm sure the budget was tight. Again, the first guy to die is the last guy from the movie, but hey, that links the last three movies all together now. I do like the makeup again on this one. Looks very good. Carradine is creepy and awesome as always. Overall, I'd say this movie was entertaining. Up next, we got The Mummy's Curse. Lon Chaney returns as the Mummy in The Mummy's Curse. Everyone knows him as the Wolfman, but he was really good as the Mummy too. This was released just months after The Mummy's Ghost, in December of 1944. Another movie released during the Battle of the Bulge. Let's see if director Leslie Goodwins can keep this monster moving into its fifth picture. Interesting though too how they use the Wolfman's eerie woods in the background there. We open with a musical number by Tanti Burth, I think that's how you say her name, played by Ann Code. She's chit-chatting with Joe, played by Kurt Ketch, and a few other workers that have been working around the swamp area under this new construction contract. The Legend of the Mummy is still pretty well known, because this takes place 25 years after the last movie, so if Tomb was technically early 1970-ish, this one is about 1995-ish, I guess. My math probably isn't correct, but I wonder if the Mummy would listen to grunge or nu metal. Pat Walsh is lead foreman at the dig site, played by Addison Richards, and he's having a hard time keeping the men working.
That's nonsense, and all of you know it.
Dr. James Housley, played by Dennis Moore, shows up with his assistant, played by Peter Coe. Remember him from The House of Frankenstein, also from 1944? They have come looking for the bodies of Karis and Princess Ananka. Walsh says he's sick and tired of hearing about this mummy. Betty, played by Kay Harding, throws her 2 cents in, and then Gabi, played by Napoleon Simpson, rushes in saying they found another dead body of one of the workers. Dr. Cooper, played by Holmes Herbert, examines the body. And then Housley tells Walsh he thinks that someone probably uncovered the mummy, and now the mummy's hanging around. But someone ordered the mummy to kill this guy. And of course, it was Housley's assistant, Zandabab. I said that really. But this is him and his sidekick, Rahid, played by Martin Kolsuk. And he's getting sworn into the priesthood with a gnarly flashback all the way to the first mummy, Well, hold on. It's actually the mummy's hand, but, they use scenes from that one, but yeah, you've heard that before. Check my review for the mummy's hand, and that'll explain the whole thing. Unfortunately for this caretaker, who happens to walk in on them, the next day, Princess Ananka happens to be unburied by one of the machines. And she's looking younger than she did the last time we saw her. This time she's played by Virginia Christine. Joe finds her wandering around the swamp and brings her back to Tandy's. Rahib lets Livia know that Karis knows that the princess is alive and well, and also where she is. But unfortunately, Tati doesn't make it. Karis chases the princess into the swamp, and she happens to randomly pass out. She's then found by Helsley and Betty. They bring her back to Dr. Cooper, and they think she has amnesia. So, Hazley gives her a job to help her remember. Odd, but okay, hey, whatever works. Karis tries again to get her back, but this time kills Dr. Cooper instead. And she runs off again with the mummy in hot pursuit. Helsley tells Walsh that the mummy is doing all the killings, but does he listen? Nope, he is still sick and tired of hearing about this damn thing. So they set up a search party for the girl and the mummy. She wanders back into the doctor's tent, and Betty happens to be there. And then Karis shows up and happens to nab her. Betty bumps into the priest-to-be and tells her what happened, and he says, hey, follow me, and I'll bring it back to Helsley. Helsley happens to return with Gobi to the tent, and they figure out the mummy has been there. He tells him to head back and get Walsh, and he's going to stay on the trail.
And sealed in this case shall be returned with you to Egypt.
The priest-to-be brings back Betty to where Zanbiv and Karis are. This pisses off Zanbiv, and he says she's got to die now. But that's not going to fly with him, so he stabs him. Helsley shows up in the nick of time and takes care of him. After a gnarly fight with a little help from the mummy.
Knock, knock.
Wow, this time it actually wasn't the high priest that was the main bad guy. Both the sidekick and the mummy are buried under tons of rubble. As the old monastery comes down, the angry mob finally arrives. A little late this time, guys. And then they find the princess all dried out. Looks like she didn't get her daily dose of katana leaves. Oh yeah, and in the last 30 seconds, they throw in a love story. Okay, the end. Well, that was another quick one. This time, no one returned from the previous movie, actor-wise at least. Princess Ananka does, but she's played by a different actress. Even though this is the 5th movie, the suspense was there in the beginning, and then by the car roadside scene, but that was about it. The long shots and special effects do look pretty good, though. Overall, I think this one may have been, it's not terrible, but I feel like after doing 4 other Mummy movies, this one felt a little bit like, let's just get this one over with. It's not terrible. I don't hate it. It definitely could have used a little more work.